Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. So go ahead and click on that and see if it's doing anything. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4.
So here
Test.
on YouTube, but not on Zoom.
Okay. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Click on that and see if it's testing 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so it's hearing there.
Yeah, it's
Okay, you
on
can
YouTube.
hear. Okay. Is there a line or something?
That's all what it's supposed to be. And YouTube gets
settle down.
Yeah, they need settle. Well, they need monitoring too. The California regional trains were
Well, I'm glad things are back to normal because we're having technical difficulties again, this time with the Zoom audio. I don't know what.
Ask your own questions?
I'm going to ask them and answer them.
But it's going live.
Of course.
It's going to be.
But that'd be fun.
I think this is going through to the YouTube channel, so we'll have that, but I apologize to anybody on Zoom. And then you'll have to pull the door shut because I can hear that. All right, thank you. Next week, Lee Senderowitz from Gender and Women's Studies in the School of Medicine and Public Health OBGYN departments will be here to talk about I was obligated to accept coercion and autonomy in contemporary global family planning. On February 8th, we're going to have a special presentation for Darwin Days, and that'll be by John Hawkes of Anthropology. He'll be talking about finding other ancient minds across the human evolutionary tree. And then on February 15th, Francisco Pellegrini from genetics is going to talk about his research, but I don't have a topic yet, or I don't have a title yet from him. So I'm looking forward to the next few weeks. And then I'll go into the standard thing here. Is it sounding all right on YouTube? Dylan, can you hear me? Hey Dylan, you got to put the headphones on so you can hear me. Is it sounding all right on YouTube? Okay. Still nothing on Zoom? Wow. All my cuss words are running through my head. Welcome everyone to Wednesday Night at the Lab. I'm Tom Zeno. I work here at the UW-Madison Biotechnology Center. I also work for the Division of Extension Wisconsin 4-H. And on behalf of those folks and our other co-organizers, PBS Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Alumni Association, and the UW-Madison Science Alliance, thanks again for coming to Wednesday Night at the Lab. We do this every Wednesday night, 50 times a year. Tonight it's my pleasure to get to introduce myself. I'm the speaker tonight. I work here at the biotechnology, as I just mentioned. I'm going to talk about the Xenos Paradox and the futures of science outreach. As you just mentioned, I have to ask myself the 5 questions. I have to warn myself that the answers don't have to be true, they just have to be believable. Tom, where were you born? I was born in Dixon, Illinois. Where'd you go to high school? I went to Dixon High School in Dixon, Illinois. Where'd you go to college? I went to undergraduate at UW-Platteville. I studied biology. Where'd you go for your advanced degrees? I went to the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and studied plant pathology. And then I came here to UW-Madison to get my PhD, also in plant pathology in the area of plant virology. And then I postdoced at agrigenetics on the east side of town for a year and a half. Then I spent 5 years at Northern Illinois University on the faculty there. And then on June 3rd of 1991, it was a Monday, I got to come back to UW-Madison, and I've been here ever since. Yay. All right. Tonight I get to talk with you about the Xenos Paradox and the futures of science outreach. So here's a little outline. I'm going to go through the paradox, and all of this is in this context of the last 3 years, which is COVID, coups, vaccines, and the politicization of public health. And if somebody interviews me in 10 years when I'm retired and says, what was the thing that surprised you the most? I will say, alas, I was in science outreach, and from 2020 to 2022, we had a failure of science outreach. The context, we're also looking at global warming into the future, social justice and academic freedom, and that these all bear on what we do here at the university and what the university does with the public out in communities and when we welcome the public to our community. I'll talk about the origins of evolutions of science outreach as I understand it, using UW-Madison as a case study. I'll be emphasizing funding because I don't know how you spell funding or future without F. And the idea that funding, the pivotal idea is every tub on its own bottom. That means the enterprise of science outreach and specific programs with it are going to have to figure out how to get funded. I'll also mention people, places, and pursuits. This is a National Academy of Science report that came out in January of 2009. It was about informal science learning, which is what we all do here in science outreach, working with lifelong learners of any age in an informal setting. And one of the things that that report didn't do was it didn't call out university campuses as a place where lifelong learners go to do lifelong informal learning. And I think that was a missed opportunity. The irony, the paradox, is that not only are our university campuses the archetype of formal learning, they're also a great space for informal science learning. One of the things that I say a lot and believe even more is that we value what we measure and we measure what we value, and if we don't measure what we do in science outreach, that makes me wonder if we value it. And then the key thing is hospitality counts and venues matters. You got to have a place and a space to welcome people. I'll ask you about the scope of science and of science outreach here, so if you want to start thinking in your own mind, how many different places are you aware of where you can go do science outreach here at this campus? And I'll be talking about the range of venues on campus and across Wisconsin. And then to me, one of the things that strikes me as somebody who watches what happens every year with the R&D, research and development budget at universities, is the predominance over the last 30 years in R&D for health sciences, and what that probably means for public outreach. And finally, I'll talk about new types of venues at MIT, at the University of Minnesota, and this extraordinary place called Colorado State University Spur in Denver. Next, many of you may have seen this before. The upper version is the concluding statement by Charles van Heise on February 15th of 1905 when he said this, which I think is the most concise aspirations for the Wisconsin idea, although he didn't call it that. I shall never be content until the beneficent influence of the university reaches every family of the state. This is my ideal of a state university. If our beloved institution reaches this ideal, it will become the first perfect state university. That's how he ended up that speech, but this is how he started it. It is a great pleasure upon behalf of the university to welcome the representatives of its owners, the members of the legislature, and the press. This is amazing to me because who are the co-owners of the University of Wisconsin? The people of Wisconsin. And keep that in mind. That's true for the whole UW system. It's especially true for this place. And we are all co-funders also because of the wonderful thing called the sales tax. And think what it means to be co-owners and co-funders of a place when it comes to asking what does it mean to be a good steward of public resources. So ownership matters, but so does intentionality. I'm guessing it's close to 20 years ago, I was at an event where the chancellor at the time, John Wiley, was speaking at Granger Hall, and to paraphrase what he said, this is not what he said, but this is what I got out of it. For a public land grant research and extension university, our engaging with the public isn't just about what the university does for the public, it's also about what the public engagement does for the university. If that sounds like Ted Sorensen and JFK's inauguration, all better, because it's a reciprocal relationship. Or to quote my friend Ken Smith, we have the opportunity to make the whole campus a destination for exploration, but we need to do that with intentionality. We need to project the campus as a place to experience science within a community of researchers. And Ken would note that we have to project that within the campus so that we agree that that's something we need to do. And we need to do that to our exterior audiences. So Xenos Paradox. The Xenos Paradox is a play on Xenos Paradox. Xenos Paradox, the one that I like the most is in order for Atalanta to get from A to B, she must first pass through the midpoint. Before she can get to the midpoint, she has to go to the quarter point. Before she can get to the quarter point, the eighth point, ad infinitum. There's an infinite number of places that she must pass through in order to get from A to B. Therefore, logically, that's impossible. Luckily, there have been better people, or there have been logical explanations to prove that motion is possible, but that's one of the famous Xenos paradoxes. This Xenos paradox is based on the meaning of this Greek word, which can mean foreigner or stranger or visitor or guest. And how we use that words, how we look at the public is the paradox. Are we going to look at the public as a foreigner and as a stranger? Are we going to look at them merely as a visitor? Or are we going to look at them as a guest? And to quote the wonderful song from Beauty and the Beast, be our guest, not just be our visitor. And what that means for hospitality and engagement. So, does a campus view the public as strangers, visitors, or guests? Let's look at some of the origin stories for the idea of engaging the public in higher education and specifically in science. Aristotle founded the Lyceum because he didn't get appointed to run the academy after Plato died. And one of the differences between the Lyceum and Plato's academy was that Aristotle offered public lectures every day to the public. That's pretty amazing. I had no idea until I heard this thing on Gresham College, which was founded, another great example, was founded in 1597, and they gave, and continue to this day, to give free public lectures in the liberal arts plus divinity, and they give them in English. The Royal Institution and the Christmas lectures are famous examples of folks welcoming the public to a place where research is done to learn more about the research being done. In the United States, there was an Athenaeum movement in the 19th century and also the Chautauqua movement. These are both examples of the public seeking out ways to become, to share ideas and to learn more about higher education type ideas without necessarily going to a college. There was also the Grange movement, founded in 1867, and that was particularly focused on agriculture issues and how to find out more about agriculture advances in research. Here in Wisconsin, there was Hoard's Dairyman, which is a publication that was founded in 1885. It had 6,000 subscribers by 1889. At that same time, the university was launching the Farmer Short Course in 1886. And one of the big things about welcoming farmers, especially young farmers, to campus for the short course, it was done in the winter. Because when did you have more time as a young farmer? In the winter. And being able to accommodate people as well as to welcome them is a big theme. Now, as to the university, the state started in entered the Union in 1848, and as part of the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, during the Articles of Confederation period, when new states came into the Union under the Northwest Ordinance, as Wisconsin did, federal lands, recently titled to the federal government from the natives, the title obtained by various means and probably coercion involved, if not outright taking. But this is big to me that there are two big land grants at this university. The one we hear most about is the Morrill Land Grant Act of 1862, but that was based on the idea of let's found universities and also common schools, public schools, by granting not cash but land to the states that they could either, and then set up foundations, either to fund a university or public schools. In 1878, man, that's 30 years later, we had only 425 students here. We graduated only 40 and only one was in agriculture. In 1883, a big deal happened to me, at least, because that's the Wisconsin Agricultural Research Station was founded. And even more so, in 1887, the Hatch Act. This is a federal act that gave research dollars, federal dollars, for research year after year after year. So there's a shift in the kind of funding. Instead of it being a one-time donation of federal land, do with it as best you can, there were dollars appropriated year after year after year. And if you would like to know why this and many land-grant agriculture universities had such strong research, which federal agency was the pioneer in giving federal research year after year, or federal research dollars year after year? It was the Hatch Act for the agriculture schools. Also in 1887, T.C. Chamberlain became president of the UW, and that's a big deal to me because he was a scientist, he was a geologist. And the university really moved forward as a research entity and as an outreach entity under Chamberlain. And he followed Bascom, and that's not an easy act to follow. 3 years later, Babcock invented his butterfat test, and that was done in Agriculture Hall, which is what we now call South Hall. Because of the butterfat test, a dairy school was launched, and Harry Russell of Russell Lab fame in 1893 developed a bovine tuberculosis test for dairy cows. Those two things, the Babcock butterfat test and the bovine tuberculosis test, really generated a lot of demand for research transfer. How do we share this science with farmers? Where do we do that, and how do we do that across time and space? In 1898, the dairy barn was built, and one of the big parts of the dairy barn was the stock pavilion, and that's where people got to learn about this, many things, including the tuberculosis test in dairy cows. So there's this interplay between research and outreach, and that research can spawn great outreach. This is a picture of the dairy barn. I don't know what year it's from. I'm assuming it's before 1908 because that's when the stock pavilion was built. You'll notice up here wonderful skylights. Here they're doing the demonstration of the tuberculin test. These folks are all dressed very warmly because it's probably in the middle of winter because that's when the short course happened. And one of the things, if you ever go to the dairy barn, you'll notice originally the only room in the whole barn that was heated besides the apartment for the herd manager was this room. It's a great space, and this building is now a National Historic Landmark based on its role in the discovery of vitamins. In 1906, another act for funding agriculture was passed, and it was named the Adams Act for a representative from Wisconsin. And one of the big deals is, unlike the Hatch Act, this one specifically said, go out and do original research. Go out and do basic research. And then in 1912, the first Ag County agent was hired by the university. They were stationed in Oneida County. And then 1914 was the Smith-Lever Act, annual federal funding for ag extension. This is a big deal to me because by the end of 1914, you have federal authorization and funding for the three canonical missions of today's public land-grant research universities: instruction, research, and extension. And here's a picture from somewhere between 1905 and 1915. Venue matters, as does hospitality. We need to have places to come and welcome people on campus. Hospitality is reciprocal. If we hope to be welcomed into communities around Wisconsin, in turn, we need to be able to welcome people to our place. And in order to do that, we need to have spaces and places to welcome the public, preferably every day in an organized way. So this is what the ag school looked like between 1905 and 1915, And one of the things I want to point out here is, oh my goodness, as a plant researcher, I believe these are randomized, complete block designed, beautiful experimental plots. So that one of the things you used to be able to do when you came to this campus was to go see experiments in plants spread out before you in these experimental plots. I'm going to shift to funding, and there's this line from Pilgrim's Progress that a president from Harvard famously raised to the level of higher education, and that is every tub on its own bottom. And that is, whatever the futures may be for science outreach, they're going to need reliable, dedicated funding. Every tub on its own bottom means that each school, each department, each enterprise needs to be able to figure out how to fund itself. So for cooperative extension, which is a federal, state, and county partnership where you get funding from all three, this includes Wisconsin 4-H, for whom I work, which is the statewide youth development program of UW-Madison. The National Science Foundation has two criteria, the intellectual merit criterion and the broader impacts criterion. And that broader impacts can provide funding for science outreach and public engagement. The National Institutes of Health has a similar expectation that researchers who get money to do research are expected to propose and execute ways to share the science with the public, sometimes through public engagement, sometimes through clinical work, sometimes through community outreach. There's also fee for service, but that raises issues of access and affordability, also the cost to process small amounts of money coming in. But this is used routinely with summer camps and similar enterprises. And then gifts and endowments. The amazing thing, though, with this is how does the public engagement mission, the third mission, and science outreach, which is just a small slice of the overall enterprise of outreach on campus, how do we compete for the time and talents of fundraisers and for the dollars of donors? It's not an easy thing to go out and raise large amounts of money every year. And I can attest to that. As part of this funding issue, one of my favorite lines, again, is we value what we measure and we measure what we value. One of the great things about this university is that every year it publishes the Data Digest. And if you have any public policy wonkiness to you at all, it's a wonderful thing to get to read every April. Also, the National Science Foundation has a HERD, H-E-R-D, which stands for Higher Education Research and Development. And that's a publication that comes out every year now in December. And they tote up the R&D expenditures, where the money comes from, where it goes to, in over 600 universities in the United States. So let's look at the Data Digest. This is the latest Data Digest for UW-Madison. And I don't know how well you can read that. It's pretty sharp to me, but I'm going to go up and look at some closer ups. The big thing is this institution in 2021 was a $3.6 billion a year operation. $3.6 billion. We had about 47,000 students. So just to let you know what this number is. We have about 930 acres on campus, a total of 9,700 acres of land spread around the state. So let's look at these up close. Where do we get all this $3.6 billion from? The federal government is the largest single source. Student tuition is the second largest. Gifts, grants, and segregated fees, also in part from students, 19%. State appropriations, 14%. Auxiliary enterprises, which I believe is going to be things like the dorms and the residence halls and the unions and similar things. So this is, when you think about this place, it's a big operation in people and in money. And again, outreach is just a small slice of that. Science outreach is a smaller slice of that. And welcoming people to campus is even a smaller slice. But that's what I'm focusing on because that's what I do. Here's the UW-Madison research budget. It's just slightly under half of it comes from the federal government. The other 55% comes from non-federal resources. We are ranked 8th in the nation, and in the Big Ten, we're second behind Michigan. So that's money. Here's people. This is a big deal because being able to do science outreach in a big scale requires I'll take that back. It's certainly helped by when you have a large number of people. So we have about 2,300 faculty, about 10,000 academic staff, about 1,000 postdocs, 5,000 graduate assistants, 9,000 total grad students. So we have a large number of people that we can draw on. I use a milk fat analogy to help us think about whether this is enough. And if you know whole milk and skim milk, you know that a little bit of difference in milk fat can make a big difference in how it tastes and how it works. So milk fat, whole milk has about 3.25% milk fat in it. Skim has nominally 0. So if you can get 3% of something, keep in mind that a small percentage of a really large number is still a large number. And if we could get 3% or even 1% of this, that's a lot of folks to be able to do science outreach with. So that was people, places. We have 938 acres here on this campus from Lake Street down to the Wasteman Center, from the lake down to Drake. The Arboretum, about a mile south of here, is another 1,262 acres. The experimental farms and stations, another 6,000. Other off-campus properties, such as Upham Woods, which is part of Extension and up in Wisconsin Dells and is long associated with Wisconsin 4-H, is another example of that. We have close to 10,000 acres around the state that are places that we can share science with, where we are the hosts, not mentioning where we can go throughout the state. So here's some things that I hope for the future we can do to improve the data digest as a person who does science outreach. There is no entry in the table of contents yet for the public service mission. Here is the table of contents. So you see students and faculty and staff. Instruction is one of the canonical missions, research is another one, and the third mission is public service, and that is not specifically called out the way the other two missions are. It would be very helpful if we did, because we value what we measure, and we measure what we value. Here's extramural research dollars. In the future as well as now, see these trends as to where research is being done? Because of the doubling and then redoubling of the NIH R&D budget, over the last 30 years, the impact, the value, the power, the influence, the beneficence of the schools of medicine, and also schools of public health, schools of pharmacy, schools of nursing, schools of veterinary medicine for universities like us who are lucky enough to have them, that becomes more and more influential. So total research awards, where do they go? Here, the School of Medicine and Public Health is 44%. The graduate school, which is what the Biotech Center is in, VCRGE, is about 20%. Letters and Science is 13%. Engineering, 9%. Cal's, 8%. So this gives you an idea of the research infrastructure, and I'm anticipating that this will reflect also where the science outreach infrastructure will be going in the future. Where does this money come from? For the federal research awards at UW-Madison, and remember this is about 45 to 47% of our overall research, 56 comes from Health and Human Services, that's functionally National Institutes of Health. National Science Foundation, we get about 14% of our research from them, 11% from energy, 7% from defense, and only 3% from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Remember, this is also the agriculture, although it's shrunk to only 3% when it used to be 100% of our federal funding for research back in 1888. This is also where the cooperative extension, what we call here in Wisconsin, the Division of Extension, gets its federal funding from. I wanted to point this out because this is a good example of public service being called out in the data digest. And you'll also see something here from 2011, 2012 to 2020, 2021. 76 million, 75, 61, 60, 71, 70, 75, 80, 145, 159. What happened there? I don't know if you remember, but on October 11th of 2017, it was a Wednesday. I was here at Wednesday night at the lab when I got a little blurb over my phone saying that President Ray Cross at the time had announced that he was going to basically be folding the tent on University of Wisconsin-Extension, and PBS Wisconsin, Wisconsin Public Radio, and Cooperative Extension as it was at the time. Eventually, those three things came back to UW-Madison, which is where they started. In 1965, those three things had been cleaved off, as well as some other things, to form UW-Extension. So this has been a powerful thing for me to have the public broadcasting, TV, radio, and the cooperative extension folks, Division of Extension, back part of UW-Madison, because when those got cleaved off in 1965, from my point of view, UW-Madison suffered because they lost their eyes and ears on the ground in all 72 counties. And it's good, from my point of view, it's great to have them back here as part of the Public Land Grant Research and Extension University. So now we're going to look at NSF, now the National Science Foundation. Every year they rank universities by R&D spending. It's called Higher Education Research and Development Survey. Over 600 universities get scanned. It asks questions. There's like 25, 30 different tables so that you can look and ask questions like, so where does the money come from? To which sciences did the money go? But here's what it doesn't tell. It doesn't say how much money is obliged for broader impacts or extension or science outreach. And I wish it did. Collecting data and compiling it is expensive. So when I ask for this, I know that it's a big ask and not easily done. But whoa, would it be great for those of us who do the broader impacts work that NSF, that's the word that they use for science outreach. So UW-Madison is number 8. We're number 2 in the Big Ten, although this may change when UCLA joins the Big Ten. So be careful when they start expanding the athletic conferences, because it might affect your ranking, not just in football and basketball, but in research. The UW system strategic plan, which just was approved on November 22nd last year, sets a goal of raising UW-Madison back to number 6 in this R&D ranking. So here's the ranking. This is what's pretty cool to me. I hope you can see this. I'll have a bigger version of this in a second. Here's Wisconsin at 1.38 billion. 1.38 billion. The order real quickly, if you can't read them: Johns Hopkins, UC San Francisco, the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, University of Pennsylvania, University of Washington, Seattle, University of California, Los Angeles, University of California, San Diego, UW-Madison, Stanford, Harvard, Duke, Ohio State, UNC, Cornell, and Yale. One thing all these things have in common: they all have schools of medicine. If you looked at this ranking 30 years ago, it would not have been this way. There would have been other schools in there that did not have schools of medicine. But because of the doubling and redoubling of the NIH budget, it has really skewed the rankings here in a way that's different than, say, 1985 or 1990. We're number 8th overall, but we're only number 16th in federal dollars for R&D. And that means we get a lot more dollars from other places, and that also means state money, institutional money. It also means, do we have opportunities to be even more successful at getting federal dollars? And one of the questions for the future of science outreach across the board at all universities is, where will the growth be in federal agencies in R&D, because that's where most of the science outreach is going to come from. And then what are and what will be the expectations for funding and for performing science outreach in the various federal funding agencies? So will it continue to be that broader impacts in the NSF is expected? Will we continue to have funding from USDA for cooperative extension type work? So this is the University of Wisconsin down here. This is for all federal. This is too small to see, so I'm going to see if I can get it. No, that's just the general gist on this is university R&D by federal agency and by R&D field. This is the headline for me. The National Science Foundation does include psychology and social sciences in STEM. Many people do not. The NSF does. And down here is $812 million for psychology research. Here's $955 million for social science research, and that's a big deal because what we've gone through under COVID and the public health issue isn't solely, people didn't know enough about ATP and virus particles. It's understanding how it is that people come to learn, what it takes for them to change minds based on data. A lot of behavioral research and educational psychology research is going to be important for understanding how to do science outreach better. Okay, so university R&D, of that $89.8 billion total, $49.2 billion is federal. Back to who pays, this is a big deal. Whether you go to a private university or a public university, whether you're a person going to the new MIT museum or coming here, you can be pretty confident that a good chunk of the research going on at a private university or a public university, you're helping to pay for with your federal tax dollars. You are a co-owner and a co-operative in this splendid enterprise. Within that $89 billion, $70 billion goes to science, $14 billion goes to engineering, and here again are the breakouts for the social sciences, $2.8 billion for social science research in the United States, and I'm just want to reiterate that. This is back to the data digest, and this is the biennial capital budget, and that is new buildings. And it's too small to see, but what I want to point out is between 2003-05 and 2021-23, these are biennials, so you go back, this is going back 20 years. In these 10 bienniums, this 20 years here at this university, the increase in non-tax dollars reflects an increase in private funding for capital projects. That's really good for UW-Madison, but as a UW-Platteville alum, I know the depth of the pockets for raising private money for public buildings at Platteville is probably not what it is for here. So this dependence on private funding for public buildings is going to be a challenge for people doing science outreach at places that don't have 440,000 living alumni, the way UW-Madison does. And then the buildings that have been included in this include the education, include the education building renovation, the addition to the Chazen Museum of Art, music performance facility, which I think is now called the Hamel, the School of Human Ecology addition, the new Union South, which opened on April 15th of 2011, and renovating Memorial Union. What you don't see here is a space for sharing science. And whatever took for these folks to get buildings, I'm assuming that's what we'll have to do for getting new venues for sharing science. So I warned you about this. I'd like you now to take a moment and please come up with 3 or 4 sources at UW-Madison of science outreach. Where do you go? Clearly you come here, but what are some other places that you can imagine? If you were having guests in town and they didn't know the campus well, where are some things? Could you tell them, oh, there are 4 or 5 places you can go on campus to experience science? Because this is one of the more splendid destinations that I know of for science outreach. I can say that because I've been visiting college campuses with my daughter, who was last year a junior, now this year a senior at West High School. And so it's an interesting thing getting to go with fresh eyes to see other campuses. So here are some of the places and programs that are involved in science outreach here at UW-Madison. The Division of Continuing Studies, which offers courses for fee for credit. The Division of Extension, which is the old cooperative extension. They have UW-Madison has offices in all 72 counties based on the reaffiliation of extension as part of UW-Madison. We can reach people's eyes and ears anywhere in Wisconsin through PBS Wisconsin and Wisconsin Public Radio. We have University Communications that puts out news releases and keeps folks informed through online as well as print and broadcast media. Almost all the 13 colleges and schools have similar resources. The Office for Vice Chancellor for Research and Graduate Education, again, the Biotech Center is part of that, has 16 centers in it, and some of them are juggernauts. Many of them are juggernauts in outreach. The Arboretum, the Stem Cells, the Aquatic Science and Sea Grant, the Wasteman Center, the Wisconsin Institute for Discovery, the public part of that building. So that's an astonishing array. Then the communication offices that make, again, the magazines, the websites, and the social media. Campus and visitor relations. These are the folks that welcome people to campus and produce this splendid document. I hope you'll get it sometime. It's the visitor guide and map. It helps welcome the members of the public to this campus, and it is not emphasizing prospective students or alums. Certainly includes that, but anybody that wants to come to this campus, that guide is written for you, whether you're 16 and thinking about going to college or whether you're 66 and you just want to come and explore a fascinating place. And then there's Badger Talks, which is the Speakers Bureau for the university, which does talks online and also sends scholars from UW-Madison to communities all over Wisconsin to give presentations. In addition to UW-Madison, we have this array of affiliates which are not part of UW-Madison but would certainly speed our work and support what we do in many ways. So there's the University of Wisconsin Foundation, the Alumni Association, who was one of the funders and co-founders of Wednesday Night at the Lab back in 2006, and they still support us with a donation every year. And then the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, who has a major influence in what happens in the Discovery Building and the public work there. The Morgridge Institute for Research, and then the hospitals and the clinics. The hospitals and clinics used to be part of the university. From the opening of the first hospital on campus in 1924. But in 1995, the hospitals and clinics were removed from the university and placed under their own public authority. That being said, there's still an amazing part of the science outreach capacity for this campus because of the map that I'll show you in just a little bit. I also already mentioned the visitor and guide, the map.wisc.edu, which gives a live count of available parking spaces. That's a miracle. Seriously, when people were surveyed 20 years ago and you ask them what keeps you from wanting to come to campus, two of the major things that they would say is one-way streets in Madison and I can't find parking. So at least this helps people know where you can park. Some really early parts of science outreach. The Geology Museum was commissioned in 1848. The Washburn Observatory was built in 1881 and has had a commitment to doing public viewing ever since. The Ingersoll Physics Museum, since 1917, the same year the radio got going. The physics department has two extraordinary achievements in sharing science with the public. One is the first hands-on science museum in the United States, and you can walk down the block to the Ingersoll Physics Museum in Chamberlain Hall. And the other, of course, was the development of public radio, which is now Wisconsin Public Radio. If you'd like to learn more about things, there's a website called science.wisc.edu, and you can go see the 32 or 33 science outreach venues there. Some that are also really important from the point of view of land. The Lakeshore Nature Preserve, about 330 acres here on this 930 acres of land. The Arboretum a mile south of here, the Ag Research Stations, and the Division of Extension County offices. There's also the Agriculture Research Stations, and here they are spangled across Wisconsin. Here's the Dane County offices. There are 72 counties in Wisconsin, and as far as I know, every one of them has got a county extension office. It just so happens that 6 times 12 is 72, so that's why this makes this beautiful rectangle. And here's the School of Medicine and Public Health. And I think if there's anything that's changed since I started here in 1982 in the way of science outreach, it would be this astonishing map. And this is a blow up of the key here so people can see it. Primary Academic Medical Center, Clinical Teaching Site, Marshfield Northern Academic Campus, Marshfield Northern Academic Campus Satellite, Advocate Aurora / Eastern Academic Campus. These are partners with the School of Medicine and Public Health. So when we look at this, these are not necessarily places owned by the university, but places that they partner with. And that is another extraordinary map to me of the reach of this public university through its School of Medicine and Public Health. So here's a sampler of annual cycle of science outreach events on campus. As I mentioned, on February 8th, we'll be here for a Darwin Days presentation. That always happens around February 12th, which is Darwin's birthday. The Wonders of Physics, 41st annual Wonders of Physics is coming up the second and third weekends of February. The Arboretum Research Symposium is held at the Arboretum in March every year. UW Science Expeditions Open House, April 14th, 15th, and 16th this year. It'd be the 21st annual. Engineering Expo goes way back. I don't know how far back, but it was a long-running event before we ever started UW Science Expeditions. This year, the public day is going to be on Saturday, April 22nd. Earth Day is also around that time. UW Family Gardening Day will be May 6th this year. It'll be about the 18th annual Family Gardening Day. Grandparents University into its 21st year, organized by the Wisconsin Alumni Association, and with 30-some majors over 3 weeks, Thursdays and Fridays. It's an extraordinary event. The Native Gardening Conference again, and then the Wisconsin Science Festival started here by the folks in the Discovery Building and at Wharf, and has spread all over the state now. It is truly a statewide science festival. So finally, the futures, plural, because I don't know which way it'll go, of science outreach. What are some other universities doing? Especially in this area of hospitality counts and venue matters, and that the social and behavioral sciences will matter more and more. And the predominance of health sciences, R&D. So the first one I'd like to point out is the MIT Museum, which has been around a long time and had a older location that they've just moved out of because they moved into their brand new building in October of 2022, just 4 months ago. I'll show a picture of the University of Minnesota with a new Bell Museum that opened in 2018. And then this Colorado State University Spur campus at Denver opened, well, the third of its 3 buildings opened just this month. And as I note there, it is free, and there's nothing else like it that I know of. So here's the new MIT Museum. This is in Kendall Square. I don't know Boston that well, but apparently Kendall Square is the major hub for all the high tech that comes out of MIT, Harvard, BU, and other the universities in the Boston area. It's 56,000 square feet. That's a lot. First 3 floors of this building here, and it's right across the street from the new MIT Welcoming Center. As I mentioned, these new places are really looking into how to not only demystify technology, but the social and ethical implications of these things. And so that's part of what this is. It's a space and a place for not only exhibiting cool things, but having conversations with researchers and delving into the social and ethical and political angles of science and scientific issues. This is a picture of the new Bell Museum. I got to visit the old one, which was on the Minneapolis campus of the University of Minnesota. And then this one, through some very diligent work done by the director who gave a talk here back in 2007. This was opened in 2018 on the St. Paul campus, which is the College of Agriculture, College of Food, Agriculture, and Natural Sciences at the University of Minnesota. This is the State Natural History Museum for the state of Minnesota. It's also home to the Minnesota Planetarium. And finally, the Colorado State University, its main campus is the land-grant University for Colorado, is in Fort Collins. But in preparing this talk, I stumbled on this thing called CSU Spur in Denver. And it's the culmination of 3 brand new buildings on the grounds of the National Western Stock Show in Denver. And they are called, the 3 buildings are called Vita, Terra, and Hydro, life, earth, and water. And one of the things you're going to see about this place is they had land, open land, at least available land, and no small amount of it because they're at the National Western grounds. And they have a large urban population that they can draw on. And I'm not going to show this video, but you might want to go to their website and see it. Excuse me. This is a drone shot from earlier this week or late last week. These are the 3 buildings. This was bare earth 5 years ago. You can tell that because I'm going to show you the picture of the bare earth. This is this wonderful thing called parking. And this is parking for the National Western Stock Show, as well as the National Western Center, which is another destination for Denver. This is the South Platte River, which flows north to the other branch of the Platte River. And this is the little river that goes through downtown Denver. That is an extraordinary feat, building 3 buildings in 5 years. This is what it looks like on Google, and this is all bare ground. So whenever they took this shot for Google, there wasn't any there yet. Look at this. Look at this. I don't know how they got this location, but if you want to do public outreach at buildings that are designed to do research and have the public there, this is a pretty good place to have it. And it's free. I don't know how they do it. I got to do some more digging. What's that?
You want to know how they do it.
Yeah, I've been able to find out only so much. And that is a summary of my talk again, the paradox, the contexts, the origins, the funding, the idea that if we're going to do science outreach and it's about people, places, and pursuits, never forget how powerful university campuses are. We do outreach here on campus to welcome people here so that they in turn will welcome us into their communities. And we have people, places, and an unbelievable range of pursuits. And we need to value what we measure because we measure what we value, and we have to figure out ways to measure what we do in science outreach. Not everything that we do in science outreach can be measured, but if we can figure out how to measure those things that can be, that would be great. Hospitality counts and venue matters. I think the predominance of health sciences and R&D and in public outreach is something that certainly changed in my lifetime, in my career, and will probably continue to change. And then these new types of venues, whether you're at the private, MIT is also a land-grant university, but it's private. University of Minnesota, which is one of our peer institutions, or at CSU Spur in Denver, which is, as the saying goes, not like anything I've ever seen. So I'd be delighted to take any questions. Thanks for staying.
Do you have any idea what the proportion of inputs? Yeah, I was going to ask you about other countries that have a federal state type of government, like I was thinking of Australia or Germany or Canada. What is the level of financing from the state governments versus the federal governments in those countries? Do you have any idea?
I don't. And I've been to universities at those places, but that was long ago, and I don't know how they're structured or how they've changed since I was there. So it's a good question for which I don't have a good answer. Yes.
Yeah, thanks. So I just want to make sure I word this right. I'm blanking now that I have a microphone in my hands, of course.
It's never happened before in the history of humanity.
Yeah. So you had emphasized how, a kind of each tub on its own bottom, right? And I was wondering the degree to which you may think that the university may be getting in its own way due to maybe an excess of internal competition, right? Do you know what I'm kind of getting at, or do you think that kind of competition necessarily is the most efficient system for the university to kind of find its own funding and direction?
Competition for resources is a fact everywhere. Can you be at a place where collaboration is valued and synergy is valued and rewarded because you can get more bang for your buck? And I think that's one of the things in research, and I hope in outreach, that this place is famous for, and that we can draw people here for that, because we have a reputation for being collaborative in research, and I hope we have one for that in outreach. Sure.
How do you measure that? Sorry, I was just basically asking, how do you measure that? Because if we do value that, how do we measure that?
So how do we measure that? I don't know, and I don't know that we do. There's two types of data, qualitative and quantitative. I think we can generate and have generated qualitative data based on testimonials, case studies, and right now I think that's the best that we can do. That doesn't mean we couldn't do more if we had better demographers working on this than me, because I'm not a demographer. But I do want to emphasize that within demography, data is not only quantitative, it's also qualitative. And so being able to build a case based on testimonies and case studies is something I think we also need to spend some time on. Thank you for your question.
Somewhat related to it, but in the competition versus collaboration, a lot of times the NIH does that fairly well. If you want to collaborate and make a bigger grant, you can have a more security, and obviously a lot of researchers go for prestige over time. So the collaborators clearly do produce better quality work over a longer period of time, and that's kind of self-selects in some sense. Now, having said this, going back to what you just mentioned toward the end, you measure what you value. What are some of the things that you can measure for science outreach? I mean, this sounds like, so the Wisconsin Public Radio somewhat financially solvent on their own, one way or another. And it sounds science outreach, it sounds a little bit more challenging to produce the results of doing it. And if we can do it, I said we because I do like coming here, if we can do it either by numbers or even some kind of rhetoric, production out of this grant, I think this will be a lot more securely funded and perhaps clearly better funded. And for example, Grandfather's Day does not produce numbers, for example, this many dollars came out, or if there is a way to measure downstream effect, either for example, agriculture outreach, the production efficiency went up, and you can certainly point to certain things that outreach practices did result in better outcome. Is there any way, any entity that actually devotes itself to measure the production out of this, resources?
Let's use the Grandparents University as an example. And I do that because it was started as a collaboration between Cooperative Extension and the Alumni Association. And I'm proud to be associated with the Cooperative Extension, now Division of Extension folks. And delighted to work every year with the Alumni Association on Grandparents University. My statement about Grandparents University is this: any university that could do GPU and doesn't do GPU is stupid. Now, how do you go about measuring effect? Well, the nice thing about a program like Grandparents University is you can say, how many majors did you offer? How many people enrolled? How much money did they pay for that enrollment? When we gave them the evaluations, we can put in qualitative and quantitative angles to that. Because some of the folks, well, all the folks are alums now that do GPU or members of the Alumni Association. Can we follow up with them, the adults, in a year or two or a few? Many of them are repeat customers so that you can get feedback from them And if you've ever gone to GPU graduation, there are people that get their PhDs. That is, a kid started as a 7-year-old, and they've gone every year with their grandparents through 8 summers. That's pretty impressive. So that, I think, is a really good example of where there is ways to measure both quantitative data and qualitative over time. Trying to figure out what's the impact of agriculture research and extension in agriculture yields and stuff. I think that would be harder for me to be convinced that any one thing was responsible for that overall stuff. How you go about doing that, I'd defer to the sociologists and demographers who know how to do that, and the evaluation people. Just because I don't know what it is doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But I would be very interested in knowing how we can do that for things like my program, where when we welcome people here to the Biotech Center, a tour group, a school group, we often have them for 1 hour of time. That is a very small divot of time. We try to make it a pivotal experience. We can find out satisfaction. Did you like it? Would you come again? But as far as being able to ascertain that we transformed how they do and view science, I don't know how I would do that in a convincing way, since it's one 60-minute experience out of a 12-year-old's life. I'd be happy to take testimonials that they say, yes, this really made a difference to me. Over the 30 years that I've done this, I've had people come up to me and say, wow, I got one of those little tubes of DNA from you when I was in 6th grade, and I ended up becoming a PhD in molecular biology. That's 1 or 2 people over 30 years. That's not a way to justify what I do, but it's a fact, and it makes you feel really good, and it's not going to convince people to continue to fund this. So part of it is, how do we convince people to fund this? And I don't know the answer to that.
And I do think that, doing science in general is one of the best investment any country can do. And then there was an article back in late 1990s, the R&D kind of return on investment on science has been the boon since 1940s for this country. And even Wednesday night at the lab, I don't know, I'm just trying to figure out how we can measure this so that we can advertise it, secure it more. I mean, even if it's just free membership that we keep track of, either do it by Facebook or just membership through UW, so that we can, follow the members, alumni and so on, and people who have ever come here, keep track of people who are coming. And, once in a blue moon, you may get somebody responding. I attended a session on AI here, the lady, a speaker who gave a talk about a month or a half ago. And then now I'm doing something relevant. I think those are some of the soft production, not like publications like NIH grants where you produce and you survive, and if you don't, you're done. But I'm just trying to see whether we can make, just like you said, measure what you value. If you can do measurements, you can secure this a little bit more, perhaps even more resources may be actually allocated to this.
So you mentioned membership organizations, and I think I'm envious of what the Chazen can do, what you mentioned, public radio and public television. And those are large organizations. I think there's 280 some people that work for broadcast in Vilas Hall and that type of thing. I don't know how many people work for the Chazen, but they have people dedicated specifically for membership, employees. We don't have that here that I'm aware of, because most of our science outreach venues are what I call boutique science outreach venues. Mine is 1.5 FTE with Dylan and Elizabeth as student hourlies. When I think of the other places that we can go, I think the Geology Museum has 5 or 6 FTEs, and they do have a membership organization. So to get to a critical stage where you have enough bandwidth not only to do the programming, but to do these things that'll help you go to the next proverbial level, I think that's one of the things that I believe we would be helped by if we had a campus-wide public science program, and that's or venue, and that's part of what we would be able to do, is to synergize some of the things that the existing constellation of boutique science venues will always be, to me, the value add of coming to campus. It's nice to go, for example, when I took my kids to the Bell Museum, it was great to go see the exhibits, and it's wonderful to have interactive exhibits. But what's even more wonderful is to go to some of these small boutique science venues, either at the Minnesota campus or here, and get to work with interactive scientists. And how we might be able to do that, I don't know. That's why we're talking about the future. That's why I want to find out more about CSU Spur and how they are funding this, and have a free come and see us 6-7 days a week. And I'm amazed and envious, and I hope we can find some ways to compete with that. Sandy.
Well, when we talk about your guests, I think that we live in a bimodal society for science education. Since we just had this wonderful impulse function test, and as an electrical engineer, that's one of the ways that we test things. So I would look at like Johns Hopkins or University of Minnesota that had an excellent response to the science education of epidemiology, and look at their demographics and why were they able to do a little better than we did here in Wisconsin in terms of education for our latest pandemic.
Yeah, that would be good to know. Yes.
Yeah, thanks. I had 2 quick questions. That data table, one of the data tables you showed, mentioned something called a yield percentage rate. I was wondering what that was. And the other question I had that escapes me now, well, I'll just go with one about the data table. It had a yield rate, so I'm just wondering what that meant.
That means bushels per acre. Nobody's laughing. Please, dear God, please, dear God. I don't know what it means.
I thought it maybe meant graduation rates or something.
I'm not sure what table it was. Was it the...
It was one of the earlier ones.
Okay, so when... I know yield is one of the things that people talk about when they're looking at graduation or looking at applications. Let's see if I can find it. Okay, so is this the one that you're talking about? Yes.
Yes.
All right. Because my daughter's going through this, I have some idea. There were 53,829 people who applied to the university. The university admitted 32,466. Did they all come here? Only about 8,465 came here. What is the rate of admit to application? I'm assuming that's what that is 62 divided by 53. Does that work out to about 60%? I'm just guessing here. And then the yield rate would be, Oh. So whoever's better at math than I am, it's going to be out of your, no, is it out of total applicants, which would be 8 over 52? Yes. Yep. So that's the admit rate versus yield rate. Now, can I go back to bushels per acre, please? Something I'm familiar with. Okay. Okay. But this is a big deal because when you're looking at quality of, or perceived quality or prestige or whatever you'd like, public universities are in a dilemma because you want to say yes to as many people as you can. That's part of what we think we ought to do. But if you're trying to compete with privates where, you know, the exclusivity is a virtue, or at least some people perceive it that way, you know, we're sad for every admitted person that can't come here. And that might be true for the private folks also, but this is part of what we're looking at. So when my daughter applied to various universities, one of the things my wife, who knows how to look such things up, would go on niche dot something or other, and she'd be able to say, well, they have an acceptance rate of 80% or 60% or 40%. And so I'm guessing that that's admit rate is acceptance rate, and ours is 60%. And the yield rate, in other words, of the ones that the university admission folks admitted, 8,000 of those 32,000 came, which asks the question, where did the other ones go? So, I don't know.
Actually, unfortunately, I'm financing 2 college kids right now.
Congratulations.
But the yield is, they try to get that as high as possible because it affects their U.S. News ranking.
Okay.
As well as niche.com ranking. Some schools will play this where they are not going to admit you even if you're well qualified unless they're convinced that you're likely to come there. They do that with the early decision ploy where they fill a lot of their class with a binding early decision. So that's just a number that institutions are cooking.
Okay.
I mean, if you're competitive, you're going to have a high yield rate, but all the University of Michigans and California, Berkeley's and so on, you're going to have a yield rate in that range, maybe at most 40, 50%, because the Joe Smith, who gets accepted at Berkeley, if he gets accepted at Yale, he may just hop on a plane and go across the country, and that's one yield that got lost.
So you can see why I didn't spend any time on this particular part, because I've spent my last 31 years not doing formal education, and until Claire was ready to go to college, not really worried about it. And it's a whole nother part of Idaho, and it's a much bigger part of the university than, say, the science outreach slice is, but science outreach is the slice that I live in.
Tom, we have 2 on Zoom. Could we ask quick? Okay, perfect. Diana says, Washington University has a mini med school with physicians discussing medical topics and case histories. It is very popular. Could UW do that?
UW does do that, says Dareth.
Okay. Second question. Another question. You would think the motivation to understand science would have peaked during the pandemic. How do you then explain how do you explain this is exactly when it fell apart? I'm baffled myself.
I think I said I don't know about that, and I share your bafflement and frustration. I will say that at this lectern in November of 2018, Steve Orrick gave a talk on the pandemic. And it was one of the most extraordinary talks in the 17-year run of Wednesday night at the lab, because he pointed out that both the university and the city, in his opinion, opinion, I think this is fair, intentionally forgot about the pandemic. It coincided with the war, was speeded by the war, World War I, and so we have memorials to the war. We don't have much in the way of memory for the pandemic, even though the pandemic arguably killed more people worldwide than the war did. And that, I think, that was in my mind 3 years ago when we were gearing up for this. It's like, how are we going to deal with this pandemic? Are we going to face it? There's no other war going on right now that we have to compete with, and yet we have a 3-year history that's going to be, a case study for decades to come of what went wrong. And I don't know what went wrong.
Just a comment. Recently, I read an article that said that, I'm not sure if this applies so much, but that the University of Wisconsin is one of the top 5 institutions to produce PhDs that go on to other universities to teach. I'm wondering if I find that to be very interesting. I wouldn't have expected that myself, and maybe you'll comment about that statistic. I think it's about 40% of all the PhDs are coming from Wisconsin and 4 other institutions.
So when you look at that data digest and then you go and you watch the number of PhDs produced out of this place year after year after year, and this is a pretty high caliber place. That came out 3 or 4 months ago, and if you're not in that group, you're like, what's up? And if you're in that group, you're like, and since I'm in that group, I kind of went, and I got my PhD here, and I went and taught at another university for 5 years, and I came back here. It's a dilemma because academia is heavily influenced by prestige, and I'm going through that with my daughter at the undergraduate level. It's like, where do you want to go? Why do you want to go there? Why do I want you to go here, there, or the other place and not some other place? So, yes, I can affirm that I remember seeing that article that, and yes, UW-Madison is one of the top 5 or 6 producers of PhDs that go on to fill professorial positions at other universities around the United States.
Have the various parts of the campus that do any kind of public outreach ever gotten together and talked with each other about what works better or what doesn't work as well?
Well, one of the reasons we do science expeditions is to, and this started in 2003, was to give a chance for those of us who are science outreachers to get together and work on a joint project. I don't think we get together and say, oh, what's working better, what doesn't, in a coherent way. We certainly exchange ideas and that type of thing. There are people in the School of Education who do research on informal science learning. There are people in the School of Life Science Communication who do that kind of research. And I think those are the ones that are going to be doing that scholarly, publishable work. How that helps drive what we do or don't do is not clear to me. Because our numbers, well, I'll just say that, and then that might be on me, not on them. Others, yes.
Yes, I just remembered the piece of trivia I was going to ask you about. Are there, in fact, 72 extension offices in all the county seats? The reason I ask is because for a long time, they combined the extension offices for Forest and Florence counties. So does this mean that Florence has their own extension office now? Do you know?
I don't know, I'd looked that up. I think what was combined was the personnel, and that they could spend some days at one county office and other days at another county office. I showed you when I looked it up, there was a county for there was a green link for every county. But again, this is 72 counties agreeing year after year after year to fund a county office, and from time to time, some county boards have said, no, we're not going to do that. And so for a period of time until they decide they want to be part of the system again, there is no, there may be no county office. I have to, and that's one of the things that's always intrigued me about the use of the word cooperative extension. It's cooperative not only in the sense that we're going to work together, but it's also cooperative in how it's funded at the federal, state, and county level. And so think what it takes if you're the person in charge of cooperative extension in any state. You have an awful lot of people that you need to keep connected with, especially east of Missouri and Minnesota and stuff. As you start getting further west, the counties get bigger and therefore not as numerous. But I think there's 101 counties in Illinois. If I was the director of extension in Illinois and I had to keep track of 101 people, in other words, just the chairman of the county boards, whoa. So it's a daunting thing, but it's also one of the reasons that it's a populist impulse from the 1887 Hatch Act through the 1914 Smith-Lever Act, and that the public universities should be responsive to the public sometimes in a very politically sensitive way.
And I think in Texas, there are even some counties that have more square miles than inhabitants.
Easily.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming tonight, staying. By the way, thank you. We'll go across next door because my goodness, am I dry. Okay. See you next week for Lee Senderowitz's talk on I Was Obligated to Accept Coercion and Autonomy in Contemporary Global Family Planning. Thanks.